Hello everyone, welcome to Earth Archives. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment and share this video. Also, make sure to turn on the notification bell. Thank you. Today's topic is the greatest miscarriage of justice in Western history, the Dreyfus Affair and anti-Semitism. On October 7, 2023, the terrorist group Hamas launched thousands of rockets from Palestine and infiltrated Israel, committing heinous acts. They also employed cognitive warfare, inciting global leftist and Arab immigrant communities to stage pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests. This situation escalated to such a degree that Western governments ordered legal punishments and even the deportation of supporters. However, anti-Semitic events in history are not uncommon. The Dreyfus Affair, which took place over a century ago in France, is one such incident. Today we will examine this case and identify some similarities. First, let's look at the historical context. Since the establishment of the French Third Republic in 1871, cases of corruption, bribery, and illegal activities within the government were rampant. Jewish bankers, who held significant power in the financial sector, were often implicated in scandals involving collusion with politicians. As a result, conservative factions heavily criticized the government, asserting that Jewish individuals were complicit in the corruption and decadence. This intensified anti-Semitic sentiments within the military and broader society. An anti-Semitic journalist, Edouard Drumont, who maintained that Jews in the military are damaging national interests, formed an ugly yet fervent anti-Semitic alliance in 1889 alongside devout conservative Catholics and extreme nationalist factions advocating revenge against Germany. In 1892, he established the alliance's newspaper, La Libre Parole, seizing any opportunity to rid France of its Jewish population and influence. Their slogan, "France belongs only to the French," implicitly meant the Jewish hand grasping at France must be severed. This alone was not enough to fuel the fire of anti-Semitism. The 1892 Panama Canal scandal significantly worsened matters. The scandal involved the colossal failure of Ferdinand de Lesseps' attempt to build the Panama Canal, which led to the bankruptcy of the canal company in 1889. This collapse caused nearly 1 billion francs in losses, leaving 85,000 small shareholders unable to redeem their stocks and bonds, pushing some to bankruptcy and even suicide. It was deemed the largest financial corruption scandal of the 19th century. In this debacle, 104 prominent figures in French politics, including ministers, parliamentarians, and journalists, were found to have accepted bribes from the canal company, effectively silencing them about its financial troubles. Amidst the calls for accountability, Drumont used La Libre Parole to reveal lists of those who had accepted bribes and to highlight how the canal company had employed influential Jewish financiers, bankers and business owners as intermediaries and agents for these bribes. This revelation turned La Libre Parole into one of France's most powerful newspapers, elevating anti-Semitism to levels not seen for over a century, making it an unprecedented anti-Jewish wave since the French Revolution of 1789. This surge in extreme nationalist sentiment laid the groundwork for the Dreyfus Affair. In September 1894, French intelligence obtained a crucial piece of information through a woman named Marie Bastien. Although she worked as a cleaner at the German embassy in France, she was also a French spy. On September 25, 1894, Bastien retrieved a torn-up document from the wastebasket of the German military attaché, Lieutenant Colonel Maximilian von Schwarzkoppen. Once reassembled, the letter revealed that it was an unsigned note offering to provide Germany with several pieces of French military information. 1. Test records and experience with the 120mm artillery hydraulic recoil mechanism. 2. A summary of troop movements. 3. Adjustments in artillery organization. 4. Records concerning Madagascar. 5. A summary of field artillery tests, dated March 14, 1894. The most alarming aspect of the letter was that the informant had close ties to the French Artillery Corps and was potentially a high-ranking officer embedded within the General Staff. Investigators from the French War Department concluded that the leaker, who had access to technical data on artillery exceeding 120 mm, must have received specialized training at institutions like the French War College to understand such information. After narrowing down their search, they focused on Captain Alfred Dreyfus, an officer in the French Army's Artillery Corps. Dreyfus, who was Jewish and born in Alsace, had moved to Paris with his family following France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War in 1871, though some of his brothers had retained German citizenship and operated a factory in Germany. He began his service at the General Staff on January 1, 1893, and had visited Mulhouse in the German Empire the previous year for his father's funeral. What followed next was predictable. On October 15, 1894, Captain Alfred Dreyfus was summoned to the office of the Chief of Staff. As the only Jewish officer on the General Staff, he was especially vulnerable in an environment rife with anti-Semitism within the military. He was asked to write down several words and phrases for comparison and was promptly arrested on the spot, accused of treason. By October 30, the preliminary investigation was concluded, and just a day later, the media had already labeled Dreyfus as a traitor. On November 3, Dreyfus appeared before a military court in Rennes, charged with betraying French military secrets to Germany. He was found guilty of treason and sentenced to public degradation and exile to a remote island. However, there were 3 expert opinions indicating that Dreyfus's handwriting did not match that of the incriminating letter. Despite this, Alphonse Bertillon, a noted anthropologist and criminologist without any prior experience in handwriting analysis, testified that the handwriting samples matched. His assessment was taken as decisive, and the court relied on it as the main evidence for convicting Dreyfus. Dreyfus, of course, maintained his innocence, but his appeals were in vain. From December 19 to 22, 1894, a court of 8 judges presided over the trial, but none of them had the specialized knowledge of artillery required to establish a clear link between the letter and Dreyfus. This lack of expertise left the evidence and reasoning behind Dreyfus's conviction on shaky ground. Despite the lack of conclusive evidence, the court compounded Dreyfus's presumed guilt by emphasizing that some of his family members still held German citizenship, which reinforced suspicions of treason. Consequently, he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment on Devil's Island. Before being exiled, Dreyfus was subjected to a meticulously staged degradation ceremony on January 5, 1895, in the courtyard of the French Military Academy, where he was publicly stripped of his rank. Soon after, he was transported to Devil's Island, arriving in April of that year, where he endured solitary confinement and harsh labor for years. Nevertheless, Dreyfus's case did not fade from public attention, largely thanks to his Jewish family, especially his steadfast brother Mathieu, as well as various politicians and members of the press who believed in his innocence. In 1896, Georges Picquart, the new head of the intelligence service and himself an anti-Semitic Protestant, discovered evidence indicating the true traitor was another member of the General Staff, Ferdinand Walsin Esterhazy. Picquart reported this information to the General Staff and called for a retrial of Dreyfus. Was a retrial granted? The answer was a resounding no. Much like modern bureaucracies, the General Staff refused to admit any mistake that could tarnish the military's honor. Additionally, Picquart's Protestant faith set him apart in a predominantly Catholic military, making him an outsider. The General Staff ordered Picquart to stay silent and reassigned him to Tunisia by the end of the year. In Tunisia, Picquart drafted a memorandum to the French president, which ended up in the hands of a senator who considered covertly revising Dreyfus's conviction. However, the military generals and the government firmly opposed any reconsideration of the case. Even during later trials where generals testified, they refused to amend their statements. High-ranking officers, led by Major Henry, went as far as fabricating evidence against Dreyfus and creating false accusations to discredit Picard, which eventually led to Picard being dismissed and arrested. On January 11th, the acquittal of Esterhazy incited widespread outrage. For example, on January 13th, the famed writer Émile Zola published his powerful open letter, J'accuse, in L'Aurore, addressed to President Félix Faure. In it, Zola boldly declared that Dreyfus had been wrongfully accused. This act of defiance led to Zola being convicted of libel and sentenced to a year in prison. To avoid arrest and potential assassination by extremists, Zola chose to flee to England. How extreme must a government be to provoke such measures? The case sparked intense controversy and mobilized progressives such as Georges Clemenceau and Jean Jaurès, who called for an exhaustive investigation into the higher authorities and conservative military and church powers responsible for the wrongful conviction. Surprisingly, many might not know that this infamous affair indirectly led to the founding of the iconic Tour de France. France was almost entirely split into two fierce factions, supporters and opponents of Dreyfus. The conflict was so intense that any mention of the case would often lead to heated arguments, broken friendships, and even physical altercations. In July and September 1898, Dreyfus's wife petitioned the Minister of Justice twice to no avail. Initially, Minister of War Cavaignac declared before the French Parliament that the military possessed ironclad evidence proving Dreyfus's guilt. However, mounting public pressure forced the government to reopen the investigation. By late September, the Court of Cassation began reviewing the 1894 trial, exposing Major Henry's forgery of incriminating documents and evidence against Dreyfus. After being arrested, Henry confessed and soon died by slashing his own throat with a razor. Meanwhile, the true traitor Esterhazy fled to England after deserting his post. Faced with overwhelming public outcry, both Chief of Staff Boisdeffre and War Minister Cavaignac resigned. In June 1899, the court annulled the original verdict against Dreyfus and sent the case to be retried at the Rennes Military Tribunal. Dreyfus was brought back to France, but in the August trial he was once again found guilty, this time with a reduced sentence of 10 years. President Émile Loubet informed Dreyfus that he could receive an immediate pardon if he agreed not to pursue further appeals. On September 15th, Dreyfus accepted the conditions, a move that disappointed many of his sympathizers. Clemenceau, for instance, harshly criticized Dreyfus, calling him an unremarkable pencil pusher. On July 12, 1906, the French Supreme Court officially annulled the guilty verdict against Alfred Dreyfus, fully exonerating him. Picard, who had been imprisoned as a result of his involvement in uncovering the truth, was promoted to Brigadier General and later appointed Minister of War. To make amends, the government held an elaborate ceremony to reinstate Dreyfus, promote him to the rank of Major, and award him the Legion of Honor. The Dreyfus Affair is often considered the greatest miscarriage of justice in Western history. In 1908, Dreyfus survived an assassination attempt with minor injuries. He later participated in World War I and passed away in 1935. As for the military officials who persecuted Dreyfus, Major Henry was the only one to take his own life, while others were not directly held accountable for their actions. However, many high-ranking officers were dismissed during the anti-clerical reforms that began in 1902, which republicanized the military. This reform eliminated monarchist influences and reinforced the authority of the elected government over the military, effectively ending the Catholic chauvinism that had dominated the armed forces. After the truth came to light, French society was compelled to confront its tradition of anti-Semitism, sparking a wide-ranging public debate. More importantly, for Jews across the Western world, This decade-long battle over injustice and vindication greatly fueled the rise of Zionism in Europe, paving the way for the future establishment of Israel. One prominent example is Theodor Herzl, known as the father of modern Israel, who was inspired by the Dreyfus Affair. In 1896, as a journalist in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he published The Jewish State, a book that marked a turning point in his career and life, laying the foundation for the modern Zionist movement. However, the anti-Semitic sentiment in France did not dissipate, especially during World War II. As we know, after France was occupied by Nazi Germany, the collaborationist Vichy France, under the leadership of the Pétain government, actively and willingly participated in the Nazi-led Holocaust. They confiscated and occupied Jewish-owned factories and stores and sent 75,000 French Jews to concentration camps, where nearly all of them perished. In the case of the French Holocaust, the victims represented 22% of France's total Jewish population of 340,000, including the granddaughter of Captain Dreyfus. Fast forward to the present, despite the presence of numerous anti-Semitic and Hamas-supporting radical organizations, and even support from some Arab countries, have you noticed that not a single country is willing to accept Palestinian refugees? Even Egypt is desperately closing its borders, refusing to allow any refugees to enter. The reason is that the reputation of Palestinians is so tarnished. Wherever they go, there are armed uprisings, attempts to overthrow local governments, and even plots to assassinate the King of Jordan. No government wants to take in such terrorists. This is all a result of their own actions, isn't it?